Welcome to DRGLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss the economic developments that we may see in China. This is a somewhat special episode because it is the last time I think that I will be recording with this microphone in this apartment in France, because in just over 10 days, I will hopefully board a plane and fly back to China, my home. And I will be posting this microphone the day after tomorrow. So I'm already packing. Since without a microphone, I guess I probably won't be making any recordings. Nevertheless, this topic is also quite special because I think we're going to touch on a couple of questions which I think will be the defining theme of at least the first half of the 21st century, at least the remainder of it. I want to develop today's podcast in 3 steps. Obviously, usually my podcasts are not scripted. And this time, because I've been packing for about 10 hours, it's almost midnight, so it is even less scripted. I just jotted down 3 points that I want to cover. First, I want to talk about the economic difficulties that China is facing. I want to do it very briefly, very quickly, because I think I've discussed this issue before. And of course, there are a lot of people who like to point to these difficulties. Secondly, I want to discuss very briefly the new leadership, what this leadership seems to be more focused on when it comes to economics. And lastly, the 2 questions I think will be the defining ones of at least the next 3 decades. First, let's talk about the economic difficulties. First, we have a global recession pretty much going on to become a depression. I think it's very likely to be the worst economic turmoil since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And I think I can see, if you actually pay attention, you will see that at least in Europe and indeed in across the West, politicians like to point to Russia and the military conflict in Ukraine as the reason. They want to overlook the zero interest rate, the quantitative easing. In fact, that guy who came up with this quantitative easing program won Nobel Prize. That's just completely. I think if the bomber winning Nobel Peace Prize and terrorists winning or being nominated for Nobel Peace Prize is a joke on its own, but you can say that the Nobel Peace Prize was issued by the Norwegians, not the Swedes, and perhaps the Swedes are more level-headed. But we see that selecting that Ben Bernanke got selected, winning the Nobel Prize. I think, if anything, quantitative easing is it's the most important factor in today's economic problem globally, and China being part of the global economic system cannot really, avoid being impacted by this recession or depression. At the same time, we also see that China's relationship with the West has deteriorated. This, I think, it's because, for the most part, it is because whereas in the 90s and early 2000s, China was seen as a backward country. It's hardly a developing country. It's really an underdeveloped country, hardly developing. And it was seen as a place where cheap labor could be bought, regulations could be neglected, or perhaps didn't exist to a great extent. And it was really a good place for a lot of the Western businesses, corporations to make money. But since the mid 2000s, I think particularly with the great pivot by Barack Obama, the Americans at first, and I think quite a bit later, the Europeans too, realized that China is becoming somewhat of a serious competitor. And it is because China has such a large workforce, and because China has this economic and political system that allows certain let's call it economic inefficiencies, and they are economic inefficiencies, even though some may argue that those are social. There are social trade-offs for these economic efficiencies that China enjoys. But anyways, because of this, China can overtake the West in the foreseeable future, and that really is I think it's mostly a problem of perception, because people in the West, particularly in America, are so accustomed to being the greatest power, perhaps the greatest empire the world has ever seen, that I think a lot of the American politicians and functionaries really believe. I think they are resisting. By the way, it's not necessary that China will be the premier economic power, right? Even though perhaps by quantity it could be slightly higher, or maybe even quite a bit higher than than what the Americans can do. This is done on the basis of 4 or 5 times the population. So that does not necessarily mean that the standard of living is higher in China. That does not mean that the economic development or technological leadership and even ideological leadership is in the hands of the Chinese. But it appears that there is a strong confrontation going on, and this antithesis has brought a lot of economic difficulties to China. Notably, in the semiconductor sector, I think China is experiencing severe difficulties, severe disruptions, because the Biden administration has enacted threatened to revoke the citizenship of American citizens who work in China in the semiconductor industry. I almost am certain, I think I am certain that this is unconstitutional. And in fact, I'm not entirely sure that this is even legal under international law, provided that the citizens the citizens in question hold only American citizenship. With dual citizenship, I think it is legal for one country to revoke citizenship, but I don't think you can revoke citizenship of an individual who is solely your citizen. That's just ridiculous. But with rules-based international order. It is never about law. Anyway, that's the situation. I said in the beginning of this recording that I wanted to do it fast and concise, but I guess it still is a little bit long and winded. And this is, I guess, because I'm a little bit tired. So I apologize for that. On the second point, I hope that the second step, I'm going to do it much quicker. So the new leadership, we see that the Communist Party has had a Congress, and a new leadership has been reviewed, not necessarily elected, more like chosen. And we see that there are a lot of people who with backgrounds. Yes, of course, a lot of technocrats, as usual, but also people with backgrounds in nuclear energy, semiconductors, and aerospace. I think these are and perhaps also biotech, etc. These are the focus of China's economic development. In other words, China really tries to, I think, under the leadership of President Xi, whether you like him or not, they have the ambition to no longer be a place known for cheap labor or a circumvention of regulations, immoral business practices, etc. But it really wants China to be at least leaders, maybe not leaders, but highly competitive in some of the high-tech sectors, nuclear energy, in fact, renewable energy as well, semiconductor manufacturing, and aerospace. So I think that's the extent to which I want to talk about this new leadership, because the thing with talking about what other people will do is that you're most likely to be wrong the more detail you go into. So I'm not going to really go into exactly what they will do. I don't know. But the background of a lot of these people, a lot of these technocrats and other people in the leadership seem to suggest that there is an emphasis on these sectors, high-tech sectors. Whether they will succeed, well, I don't know. I don't know, because there is, just as I mentioned before, the economic. The macro environment, the macroeconomic environment is adverse, to say the least. All right, let's now move on to the last part of today's podcast. Two questions. I think that I really look forward to seeing how China will perform in the next 5 to 10 years. Let me just give out these two questions. Number one, can China be peaceful in its economic development? And can it succeed in upgrading its industries? These two are very important questions. Number one, about peace. It is quite difficult to see, because I almost want to bet that there will be strong push for reunification with Taiwan in the next years. I would say 2024, 2025. Those are the time frame that I'm looking at. Whether this can be peaceful really depends on, I think, the two things. Number one, the global economic situation, and number two, the political wind in the United States. I think the political wind in the United States is such that it seems that people are tired of war. People want America to intervene less abroad and focus more on domestic economic development. So in this case, if the grassroots can indeed shape the direction of the politics in the United States, we could see whether China is united with Taiwan or not. We could experience a period of relative peace in the Pacific. On the other hand, if some, let's say, moneyed interests continue to push for certain agendas, and if they continue to manipulate the information, and if they employ innovative or creative accounting methods in elections, then I think conflict is not out of the question. It is quite foreseeable for there to be an armed conflict in the Western Pacific. But I do not think that the Americans will themselves be involved. Rather, this will be another proxy war, very similar to the one in Ukraine. I think that is possible. So I think that's when it comes to the economics, and then is this is the politics, but also the economics is going to determine whether there will be peace in the Western Pacific. Because if, let's say, just for argument's sake, if China can manage to let's say reverse the economic slowdown in the last few quarters, and at the same time, if the West experience high levels of inflation, some social instability caused by economic hardship, we could see a period of peace, because the West, particularly the Americans, won't have the resources necessary to engage in these type of intrigues. At the same time, if let's just say vice versa. So that's the first question. The second question is, can China be successful? I think that a lot of people in the underdeveloped world or developing world, whatever, to use Trump's words, shithole countries, they probably hope China to be somewhat successful. Not necessarily so successful that China becomes a hegemon and becomes threatening to their economic freedom and social liberty. But they want China to be successful such that the Americans won't be so, crass in their interventions in these countries. And Europeans will be perhaps expelled from these countries. I'm thinking particularly of Africa, for example, which, by the way, I think France is now engaged in a war completely of colonial flavor to basically rob the natural resources And this is a country of, obviously, of the quote-unquote international community, right? And of course, it is, in the words of Josep Borrell, this is the gardeners going to the jungle to reap the harvest, by the way. So I think there are a lot of people who hope that China will be successful. But I must say that in this type of a very complicated historic environment, it is very difficult to predict what will eventually happen. I think all that's left, all that's available for us to do is to contribute our own efforts to the cause that we believe in. Doesn't need to be so wholehearted, so devotedly, but at least we try, and we try together, and we hope that success will be reached, will be obtained. Now, I'm moderately optimistic about this. I think I would say even 55-60% chance that China will be successful. But for people outside the collective West, this is a decent chance that's worth taking. How to say? I wouldn't say taking risk for, but to accept, right? It's an acceptable odds. All right, I think I'm already too tired. I'm probably going to bed now. I will process this this recording a little bit tomorrow, or maybe during the weekend, and afterwards I will post it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.